Welcome home. Can you trust Ubisoft? Let's check out all their controversies, rip on them, and find out. Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs' first trailer looked insane, but it also made people a little bit suspicious because of how incredibly scripted it was. But then the game came out and surprised everybody because suddenly it looked flat and boring. Why? Ubisoft claimed that they had downgraded the graphics because the trailer graphics were not manageable even for the new generation hardware the game was intended for. In addition, the trailer had made the game look fun, whereas the release version was basically just a bland GTA. So bland, in fact, that the very second game in the canon completely rebooted everything. Far Cry. Once upon a time, there was a game called Far Cry 3, and it was pretty good. And then they released it again, and then again, and they just kept doing that forever. This is one of Ubisoft's great strengths, taking art and turning it into a product. But of course, Far Cry 3 and 4 fell for the same Ubisoft downgrades as Watch Dogs, where the game ended up not at all looking like the trailers. If I had to like and subscribe for every time that a game came out looking different than in trailers, I'd have, how many games have EA made? The Division. The Division had taken a very long time to develop, and so it was made fun of for never coming out. What's even more funny though is that once the game did come out, it still had the usual Ubisoft downgrades. And of course the game was buggy, because in the modern day, a AAA video game is not finished until it makes the previous bugfest look good in comparison. They also made a sequel to The Division that no one asked for, which despite being a game set in an interesting post-apocalyptic America, outright stated that it was not trying to make any interesting political points. Good, I'm glad that Ubisoft has figured out that nobody wants interesting games, because I guess they wanted to avoid controversy. But if Ubisoft wants to avoid controversy, they should probably just stop releasing games. Assassin's Creed Unity. Unity was infamously bricked on launch day because it's a Ubisoft game. However, Ubisoft tried to fix this by doing something very uncharacteristic for a major corporation. They offered disappointed customers of the Season Pass one free Ubisoft game. So, go on, Nisse, what's the catch? If you took one of these free games that Ubisoft offered, you legally gave up your right to sue for the broken launch of Assassin's Creed Unity. I don't know what's more insane, that this might actually hold up in court, or that Ubisoft actually did it. The lesson here is that you shouldn't trust a major corporation. In case you needed another reminder. Heroes of Might and Magic. To give you the TLDR, Heroes of Might and Magic is an amazingly fun franchise with some amazingly fun games. After the development of Heroes of Might and Magic 4, the current publisher went bankrupt, and so Ubisoft came in to buy up the rights. Ubisoft immediately put a developer on making Heroes of Might and Magic 5, which was quickly booted out the door before development was complete. However, HOM 5 defied the odds by coming out really good. Of course, this meant that Ubisoft had cracked the code, and so the rights to make Heroes of Might and Magic 6 was given to a different developer, who got an even smaller budget? Wait, what's going on? You see, my beloved viewer, the galaxy brain Ubisoft understood that the success of Heroes of Might and Magic 5 was because the game had been rushed, and not because of the work that had already been put in before the release. So Heroes of Might and Magic 6 came out and showed that Ubisoft really had figured it out, because HOM 6 was just incredibly unplayably fucking horrible. I mean, it's on mobile game cash-in levels of bad. It was fucking terrible. Now, Ubisoft are of course smarter than to believe the sales figures, so another sequel was quickly commissioned, in the exact same style, changing absolutely nothing, and it was just as bad. Who would have thought? So this is legendarily tone deaf, but of course there's more. Heroes 3 HD, a quote remaster of Heroes Might and Magic 3. The whole cycle began, as it always does, with Ubisoft lying, with a trailer and promotional art that massively misrepresents how the original game looks. So far, so Ubisoft, but then it gets even better. The original Heroes 3 had two very fun expansions, which both added tons of new fun stuff to the game. But once Heroes 3 HD comes out, players peer inside only to find that the expansions are missing, which means that players have forked over $15 for a shit version of a game they already own. As just a little more salt on the wounds, there's still no fix for a simple multiplayer mode, something players have been asking for since the release of the original game. Okay, Nisse, whatever, it's just another Ubisoft highway robbery. Okay. But it gets better. The bullshit reason that Ubisoft gave for not including the expansions in the HD remake was that the source code for these expansions had been lost. But then, one of the guys who had ported the original Heroes 3 to Mac looked on his old work PC and immediately found all the source code, all the tools used for the development, and all the assets just hanging out on the hard drive. The developer generously forwarded all these files to Ubisoft in 2017. Ubisoft hasn't said anything since, and that's most likely the last we'll ever hear about it. My favorite part of this story is how low effort the lie was. You could literally have made a couple of phone calls and you would have had the source code. It makes me wonder if they're willing to lie to save them just a couple of hours of work. What other stuff might they be lying about? The answer is everything. Rayman! After an 8-year coma, the Rayman franchise got a new installment with Rayman Origins. To summarize, it's an excellent game. But then they made a sequel called Rayman Legends, and it would appear that the usual Ubisoft corporate strategy was being enforced on it. As in, just like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, the art was being turned into a product, and unreleased Legends did not have the spark of Origins. This may explain why there still hasn't been another sequel since 2013, despite Rayman Legends actually outselling Origins. French. Ubisoft is French. It's not a controversy, but it is an L. Microtransactions. Right now, microtransactions is half of the money that Ubisoft makes, so you may understand why they're forcing it into every game they make. Now, selling people a couple of costumes in Rainbow Six Siege, that's fine. But when you design a game from the bottom up to be as long and as arduous as possible, so that you can then sell people time savers that cut out the shitty time spent grinding, it means that you've literally sold people a problem so that you can sell them a solution. I'm pretty amazed that this is actually legal. Now, a common defense for this massive disrespect of the audience is that nobody is forcing you to buy the time savers, because the game is perfectly playable without them. But if that's true, then the time savers never needed to be added to the game, so why are they there? 2020 Sexual Misconduct. After Ubisoft had a bit of a Me Too moment, an internal investigation found that several managers and executives had been a little bit naughty, and they were promptly fired. This is important because with Ubisoft, executives got fired, but with something like Activision Blizzard, which I even made an entire separate video about, it was mostly non-decision-making employees that got fired. This is called keeping your eye on the ball. uPlay. uPlay is Ubisoft's own platform for distributing video games. For the longest time, it sucked. It was slow, it was buggy, it was glitchy, it was just awful to use. Even though it's gotten a lot better, it's still very bad. Not that it has a lot of competition. Even Steam is like, what, a 2012 progressive web app. For the full price that you pay for a Ubisoft game, the actual store itself does not have a premium feel. But that doesn't matter when you own the store yourself and don't have to share a 15% cut with any other platform. And the second reason they have their own store is DRM. DRM is short for Digital Rights Management, and it's basically software that makes it harder for a pirate to pirate a video game. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with a corporation putting protection onto something that they've spent years and millions of dollars making. But Ubisoft's DRM has had a lot of problems through the years, sometimes in the form of blackouts that prevent you from playing the game that you paid money for, even if you're completely offline and it's a game that doesn't require an internet connection. But even funnier, sometimes Ubisoft's own servers have shut down, which meant that paying customers could not play their own games while pirates could. And this once lasted for 2 weeks. Very funny. Far Cry Primal. What they originally promised was supposed to be a completely new and fresh Far Cry experience turned out to be basically the previous game with a new skin on top, even reusing the previous game's world map. Cool. Assassin's Creed Syndicate. A larger than usual amount of people complained about Syndicate when it came out, so Ubisoft makes an official statement that says, okay, we're gonna take a break from our usual yearly sequel schedule to figure this out. After this break, Assassin's Creed Origins comes out, which turns out is just a single-player MMORPG, with even less assassinations than before, one of the main things that people were asking for. In addition, the game is very long, well stretching past the previous titles in total playtime, and most of this new gameplay is of course grinding and filler. But it's okay, because the very next year, Assassin's Creed Odyssey comes out, and it immediately becomes clear that Ubisoft are right back to their old habit of making the same game over and over again. Deliciously ironic how a game about Greek mythology takes the hope out of something. Speaking of dead series, Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia had some really amazing games, but after the Sands of Time trilogy was wrapped up, Ubisoft decided to reboot the game with a new game just called Prince of Persia. Once again, the creativity is stamped out, and once again, a classic IP goes into a coma. For Honor. The story of this disaster starts with the game coming out with no dedicated servers, which means one player in the lobby is the host for the current session. And to put it simply, that player will have good ping and everyone else will have a bad time. Though the very dedicated hardcore players pulled the game back from the brink and got it dedicated servers a couple of years later, the game is still regarded as a failure in the eyes of the mainstream. And as such, For Honor is a perfect example of how Ubisoft is their own worst enemy. NFTs. To give a very simplified explanation, an NFT is basically a cryptocurrency with a piece of intellectual property attached to it. This system could be used for good, by for example protecting artists from losing their art to massive corporations with massive legal teams. But of course, this is not how massive video game publishers are using them. Ubisoft's first NFTs are effectively just cosmetics. And yes, these are technically NFTs, but they're inside Ubisoft's ecosystem, so you don't actually own them. If this was an honest, actual NFT that you could buy and put in your own wallet, that you could then connect to a number of different Ubisoft games that would give you a wide-ranging selection of different cosmetics, then this would be kind of a real feature and kind of an interesting new step in the whole skins game. But as it stands right now, it's just a new thing that they slapped onto an existing cosmetic to generate more hype about it. NFT Monkey. You remember that fucking monkey that took a picture of itself? No, not that I mean the real physical monkey. Yeah, that one. Because some smelly animal activists sued, this photo of the monkey is legally owned by the monkey himself. If all cameras were like digital Polaroids that would generate an NFT for the current photographer, then we would never have to deal with this stupid situation again. And if some other monkey reprints your images without your express permission, you can sue them for all their bananas. All in favor say ooh ah ah. Now, speaking of internet retardation, game editions and pre-orders. Ubisoft is one of those corporations who releases multiple versions of a game, where if you want everything inside a game, first you have to digitally pre-order the Ultimate Edition. Then you have to purchase the Steelbook, then you have to buy the DLC and the expansion pack, and then in the end you still have to buy a copy of the actual game. This is already pretty weird, but then you consider that the Ultimate Edition doesn't actually include the Season Pass and a bunch of extra DLC and a bunch of other shit, and then you realize that they're actually making money off of making these systems as complicated as possible. And after that, the trust is broken. But by this point, I'm assuming you've already figured out that Ubisoft is not a corporation you should give your money to. Also, I literally just found out that Prince of Persia was remastered half a year ago. It actually looks worse than the original, but this time, it seems that no one cared. Darling, if you've enjoyed this little presentation, consider clicking the buttons under this video to make me very happy. Talk to me over the server, and click here for some more fun stories. Shout out to patrons who help me not bleed cash every month while doing this. Forge, mwah, Awan, mwah, Harry, Nathan, Pumba, and of course everybody else. Thank you. Mwah.